Well, we're happy to have you here tonight. This is our second night at the museum performance. Would you call it a performance? I think so. I think they heard you were speaking, so we've got a good crowd. Before we begin, if you'd please kindly silence your cell phones, that would be a real help to us. I'm Al Donaldson, and I'm a board member here at the museum. Tonight, Sarah's presentation is entitled 1882, Disease, Conflict, and Rivalry Between Orange City and Alton. Imagine that. I was especially intrigued with the topic since Linda and I lived above the OK Cafe in Alton for the first few years we were married. That was a while ago. Bill and Lynn Frericks were good landlords, and they charged the princely sum of $60 a month for rent with utilities. Can you imagine? Anyway, I was thinking of some of the other things I remember. I remember that there was also the Firelight Lanes there. The Palace Movie Theater, you remember that? The Log Cabin, and the State Liquor Store. Although most Orange City residents only knew it by reputation. And sometimes they had to go there to get medicinal items. At that time, there was also the Democrat from Alton, and Frank Bowers was the editor. Every once in a while, he'd ruffle a few feathers. Well, I guess that's enough of my reminiscing for now. I want to introduce Sara. Sara is a librarian at Northwestern College. She earned a master's degree of American History with Museum Studies from the University of Iowa. Sara's worked for the Medical Museum at the University of Iowa and the Medical Library Archives at the University of Virginia. In 2022, she completed her Master's of Library and Information Studies with a concentration in archival studies from Emporia State University. Sara is serving as our museum treasurer, and she's made numerous nights at the museum presentations. I'd say all of them have been memorable. Recently, her story, Bullets, Booze, and a Noose, was picked up by KTIV Channel 4 and highlighted, and Sara did an expose on that program. And Larry Wentz was the news director who conducted the interviews. Now I'd like for you to please welcome Sara Huyser.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Am I loud enough? No. How about now? No. Still louder, Isaac. Okay. All right. Down with the Dutch. They are abominably superstitious. They are fatalist. The Dutch have nothing in common with the civilization of the New Northwest. They are not enlightened. They are clannish and refuse to be Americanized. They are wooden-headed men. They are 100 years behind the time. The Dutch are hoggish, despotic, and treacherous. They are ignorant, stupid, bull-headed. Down with the Dutch. We laugh. We might shake our heads with a little agreement. But what about the Dutch, who heard those exact words about themselves in 1882? Wooden-headed, hoggish, ignorant? Those are fighting words. I grew up believing that everyone loved the Dutch. And it's hard to believe that even for a moment in our early history, there was such a vocal and mean-spirited opposition to those living in our little Dutch colony. Today, many of us take pride in our Dutch identity. It's reflected in slogans like, "If you ain't Dutch, you ain't much." Historians have taken note of this pride and persistence in our ethnic identity. In 1996, Brian W. Beltman, a historian, wrote that Sioux County's Dutchness is almost as strong today as when pioneers established that ethnic colony on Iowa's last frontier 125 years ago. But let's flip the script. Imagine life from the perspective of Americans, and I will define them as English speakers in Sioux County without any Dutch ancestry. What would Dutch culture and our ethnic persistence have looked like that to them back in 1882? Well, while living in Sioux County, Will Hubbard Kernan of the limited publication titled The Free Voter, published in the fall of 1882, complained, "These people have their churches, Dutch schools, Dutch paper, Dutch societies, Dutch everything. And the worst of it is, many of them are raising their children to speak Dutch exclusively, believe in Dutch traditions, follow Dutch customs, and be as Dutch in everything as their parents." Was this an exaggeration? Not really. The reality was the Dutch Americans in Sioux County still acted like Hollanders. As you entered Orange City from Alton, a massive windmill dominated the skyline, telling the world of the colony's nationality. Orange City published a Dutch newspaper. Only Dutch was spoken in the two local churches, and frankly, they were almost too religious. While the Americans enjoyed theater and dances, the Alton Centennial book reported that Dutch viewed such entertainments as wicked, believing those who took part were only a little better than drunkards and painted women. Finally, these Americans resented the Hollanders for their stronghold in local politics. Today, we find the story of the heist of the county safe from Calliope to Orange City amusing. But there were Americans that continued to be pretty ticked off by this. They called themselves the East Enders and supported moving the county seat back to Calliope. Tensions between Hollanders and Americans were already simmering when a dread disease swept through the county in the spring and summer of 1882. From May to September, smallpox tore through Orange City's population of just over 320 people. At least 17 homes were quarantined, and deaths occurred in at least 11 of them. 3 families tragically lost 2 members to this virulent virus. Historian Samuel K. Cohen argued that the 1882 smallpox outbreak that broke out across the United States created deeper rifts through the fabric of communities than any other disease in American history. In our community, smallpox became a flashpoint for local Americans to become openly prejudicial and hostile to the Dutch settlers in Orange City. In other words, down with the Dutch. To understand the tension that erupted during the smallpox epidemic, we need to step back and examine how Orange City and its neighboring rival, the more Americanized Alton, came to be. Orange City, as we know, was established in 1870 by Dutch immigrants and first and even second generation children. After devastating hardships such as the grasshoppers and a series of brutal winters, the town was finally starting to grow through aggressive promotion by one of its town founders, Henry Hospers. Hospers published De Volksvriend to attract settlers from the Netherlands and other Dutch communities across the United States. By the 1880 census, only 18 adults and 4 children in Orange City were not of Dutch ancestry. This is less than 7% of the population. In 1872, the Sioux City and St. Paul Railroad laid tracks not through Orange City, but 4 miles to the east. The depot, named East Orange Station, was a, get this, 45-minute coach ride from Orange City. And bad roads, bad wheels, bad everything. And it was a sore spot for many Hollanders. The Dutch referred proudly to their town as De Stad, the city, and dismissed the new depot as De Statie, or the station, calling it a necessary evil or an appendage. An American, ambitious American named Alexander Beach, originally from Minnesota via Canada, was hired as the depot manager. Although the railroad assured Hospers that no town would develop around the depot, Beach had other plans. With his brothers and his parents, he opened up Beach Brothers, a store located right next to the depot. They sold hardware, feed, and farm implements. They operated a lumber yard, a grain elevator, and a stockyard. Tensions between the two towns escalated early on. In the Beach family genealogy, they remembered the jealousies between their growing settlement and the older and larger Orange City, lamenting that it became odious to be called East Orange. So repulsed by this name that Beach pushed for independence and suggested renaming the town Wilfred after his firstborn son. Dutch residents preferred the name Delft. The name Alton was a compromise that both sides could agree on. And during the peak of the smallpox epidemic, the Sioux County Board of Supervisors officially changed the name East Orange to Alton. Beach became its first mayor. And in addition to local leadership, Beach was also an Iowa State representative from 1880 to 1882. In 1882, the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad extended a second line through the town, and the depot was being enlarged. Local historian Charles Dyke noted, the railroads were the foundation of East Orange's, or rather, Alton's, prosperity and glory, calling it a busy, hustling town. Orange Cityans were worried that the railroad would render Orange City a ghost town. Alton was gaining ground on Orange City. At the same time, Dutch presence in Sioux County was growing stronger. In March, the newspaper declared, "From now on, look out for immigrants." Over the next 2 weeks, the paper documented the arrival of nearly 100 more Dutch immigrants. Charlie Dyke described how, after 1881, the country literally swarmed with Hollanders from the Netherlands. Adding new immigrants with their Dutch ways and their Dutch language only exacerbated the existing friction between Americans and Orange City. But, most importantly, in 1882, Orange City was finally getting its own railroad depot, a connection linking Calliope with Alton. And a depot would be a game changer, cementing the town's future. The newspaper predicted that the toot of the locomotive's whistle will be a joyful music to our citizens' ears. But then came the smallpox tragedy, most likely brought by this very railroad. A resident reminisced, the new railroad, the coming of which had been anticipated with so much eagerness, was the harbinger of much heartache and misery to many of our townspeople. Smallpox struck Orange City, and as the community struggled with illness and loss of life, some vocal Americans seized the moment to amplify their resentment. Down with the Dutch. So, where did this heated battle occur between the Americans and the Hollanders? There were no podcasts, TikTok, influencers, bloggers, Facebook, Fox News, or MSNBC. This war of words was fought in the only media they had, the pages of the local newspaper. Believe it or not, Orange City, remember, population of 320 people, had 3 competing newspapers. I have already mentioned De Volksvriend, a Dutch language paper. The Sioux County Herald, printed in English, was run by a second-generation Dutch American, John Colvoord, and a young American named Harry Lewis. This paper tried to balance the interests of both Dutch and Americans. The third paper, The Index, employed an editor who was a controversial character, Will Hubbard Kernan. Kernan was many things: a Southerner, a poet, an ex-Confederate, a staunch lost causer, a self-proclaimed nihilist who believed in nothing, neither God nor the devil. He hated society, law and order, and women. According to a local historian's gossip, Kernan refused to eat if a woman was in the dining room. And many quietly speculated why he always had a younger man at his side. Charles Dyke vented that beneath Kernan's innocent-looking camouflage, there was a hidden veritable mine of mental dynamite, and when that exploded, that was something to behold. It was Kernan who penned the inflammatory phrase that opened this story, "Down with the Dutch." It was Kernan who fueled this animosity against Dutch settlers. He wrote in a letter published in the Hawarden newspaper in 1883 proclaiming, "I hate with an unrelenting hatred the methods pursued by the Holland colony of Orange City, methods by which they clan together under the leadership of an incestuous thief." also lacked basic empathy. For in October, after the community had been so sick and lost so many people, he wrote in the index, "It is incapable of understanding why people will symbolize their sorrow by wearing black. It is a most repulsive relic of barbarism." The Herald got pretty tired of the index's jabs. Even before the epidemic broke out, in March 1882, the editors quipped, "It would be better for the index if it kept its little mouth closed and not allow such canine yelps to escape from the depths of its innards." Meanwhile, in neighboring Alton, another newspaper started in May of 1882, right at the beginning of the smallpox epidemic. Silas W. Tallman launched a rival newspaper, the Alton Review. While the Herald and the Volksfried were Republican newspapers, the Index and the Review embraced a Democratic viewpoint. And Tallman came out of the printing press with guns a-blazing. And in response, the Herald editors predicted that the paper could destroy all the good feeling there is existing between the two towns. This was prophetic. For 1882 was a contentious year between the two communities, and it was only amplified in these two local publications. Residents in Orange City were attacked by disease and also verbally attacked by Americans through the newspapers. Fortunately, smallpox is something we no longer have to fear. Some of us, those of us born before 1974, still bear the telltale scar of vaccination on our upper arm. Thanks to an aggressive global vaccination campaign led by the World Health Organization, smallpox was officially eradicated in 1980. As a result, we, as the modern audience, have little personal understanding of the sheer cruelty of this disease. So we're going to learn about it. Smallpox was highly transmitted. Even before symptoms appeared, the virus spread through aerosol droplets, especially through coughing and through contact with contaminated bedding, clothing, or objects infected by individuals. After exposure to the varroa virus, the pathogen responsible for smallpox, the virus incubated quietly in the body for 2 weeks. When symptoms emerged, pow, they came on suddenly. A high fever, intense chills, muscle pain, and a splitting headache. Soon after the fever, a red rash appeared, quickly turning into hard, raised nodules. These evolved into painful, pus-filled blisters that covered the body, especially the face and the hands and the feet. In severe cases, the blisters were so numerous that they merged into one massive inflamed surface, what the doctors called confluent smallpox. Victims endured immense pain. In the worst cases, the fever triggered delirium or brain inflammation. Children often experienced seizures, and smallpox didn't just kill on its own. Victims were vulnerable to secondary infections like lung fever, which we now know as pneumonia. With no antibiotics available, these infections killed as well. For at least 3,000 years, there were no effective treatment for smallpox. Doctors couldn't ease the symptoms, shorten the illness, or prevent death. But in 1798, That changed when the English scientist Edward Jenner introduced the concept of using cowpox to build immunity against smallpox. The Netherlands quickly adopted Jenner's innovation, launching a government-mandated vaccination program. But in the United States, it was a different situation. There were no coordinated federal or state campaigns to vaccinate the population. The Iowa State Board of Health was just established 2 years before the smallpox epidemic, and they had very little authority. Vaccination was not used as a preventative measure. Instead, it was only given when an outbreak was imminent, often when it was too late. Smallpox spread swiftly across the country by rail, and the construction of the railroad depot in Orange City made the town particularly vulnerable. By late April, the Herald reported that rooms at the Orange House, a local hotel, were at a premium. With a surge of railroad workers and graders and new immigrants, there were no room at the inn. Some laborers set up tents and shanties at the outskirts of town. In her reminiscence, Frederick de L'Espinasse, the younger sister of a local doctor, traced the first smallpox case in Orange City to a railroad worker. She recalled, "None of the families would take him into their homes, so he was moved to the stable of the big church," which is First Reformed Church, "laid on a bed of hay and made as comfortable as possible. The time the doctor in charge visited, the man was literally covered in the most virulent type of smallpox. Despite all efforts, he died the next day." From there, the outbreak spread rapidly. It is quite possible that the local undertaker and furniture maker, Garrett Haverkamp, buried this sick railroad worker. Though he wore a rubber slicker for protection, it probably offered very little defense, and he unwittingly carried it home. The entire family of 7 was sick for several weeks, and they summoned the local doctor, Dr. Henry Barone, for medical assistance. When their 15-month-old daughter, Jacobi, died on May 15, Barone listed her death as asphyxia due to bug bite and variola. Later, Barone was justly criticized for misdiagnosing the illness as chickenpox, which allowed the infection to spread unchecked. Alexander Beach, in a letter to the Iowa Board of Health, pinpointed the Haverkamps as first having the disease and accused the parents of allowing the children to run in and out of the house and just run at large. In today's terms, the Haverkamps would be classified as super spreaders. The dread disease killed Harriet's sister, Joanna, and 2 of her nieces. Their eldest daughter, Hattie, age 20, likely transmitted the disease to others as well. Her fiancé, John Youngward, got sick, and he lost his brother, Willem, to smallpox at the age of 20. Jenny Youngward, the brand new wife of William's brother, died just 17 days after he was buried. Another hot spot for infection was the Orange House, a hotel recently bought by R.P. and Matilda Holenbeck. Matilda's younger brother, Wilmer Hess, lived with them and drove stagecoaches or buses between Orange City and the depot. To make extra money, Wilmer also worked for the railroad. In contact with both travelers and workers, he contracted smallpox and died on June 20 at the age of 22. With multiple cases inside, the Orange House was turned into a pest house or a quarantine facility for other smallpox patients. It was closed for 5 weeks, and the Hollenbachs disinfected, repainted, and recarpeted the business. And on July 6th, it was inspected and deemed suitable to reopen for business. Prominent citizen Anthony J. Benton, yes, of the Century Home, and his household were stricken with smallpox. My father, who was a doctor, well-studied and very interested in history, told my sister and myself that smallpox patients, like the Bentons, were most likely quarantined in the basement. 16-year-old son Anthony died on July 16. Due to the risk of contagion, Anthony was hastily buried that same night without his family present because they were all terribly sick. His mother, Maria, was pregnant while battling the smallpox. Medical research has shown that pregnant women have higher degrees of susceptibility to severe forms of smallpox. Shortly after Anthony's death, she gave birth to a girl. Statistically, 50% of infants born alive to women with the smallpox will die within 2 weeks. This baby girl lived a little longer, but died at the age of 5 months. Maria survived, yet suffered from some sort of condition that left her homebound, and she died at the age of 50. And her obituary acknowledged that sickness and the blow of losing her dear son had affected her badly. Her husband, Anthony Benton, lost sight in one eye due to the disease. Smallpox devastated Orange City. In a tight-knit community where everyone worshiped together and conducted daily business side by side, the toll was immense. People of all ages were stricken. Death became a regular presence in the streets and in homes and in the church pews. The emotional weight of being sick and losing loved ones must have been overwhelming. But even as the town mourned, it faced a rising tide of hostility from these Americans. For the Americans, the outbreak in Orange City was not a moment to show kindness, but an excuse to turn on their Dutch neighbors. Blistering attacks were leveled against the Hollanders of Orange City. The editors of the local papers pointedly attacked each other, and the Americans and Hollanders responded in kind. Mayor Beach of Alton wrote a scathing letter about Orange City to the State Board of Health on August 12. Beach claims that vaccination is absolutely refused by many of the Hollanders, if not nearly all of them, being fatalist, claiming they are destined to have smallpox. They will have it whether precautions are taken or not. A couple years ago, Dr. Richard Reitsma gave a talk about anti-vaxxers and their connection to religious leaders in the Netherlands. I do, however, want to challenge Beach's accusation. Was Beach absolutely right about the Dutch, or was he merely tapping into the anti-Dutch sentiment? For older Dutch residents born in the Netherlands, vaccination was not a new practice. Since the early 1800s, Dutch authorities had allocated sizable money and human resources to an increasingly successful voluntary vaccination program. By 1823, the Netherlands instituted a nationwide law stipulating that children could only attend public school if they have a doctor-verified certificate indicating that they had received the smallpox vaccine. In fact, the Northwestern College Archives includes an original Dutch smallpox vaccination certificate issued to Hendrika Gerhard Smink, the maiden name of Harriet Haverkamp. Yes, Harriet from the super spreader family. She was vaccinated as a child in the Netherlands in 1845. When I discovered this connection, I was really excited because this artifact fits so perfectly with the story that I was telling tonight. Why was her smallpox certificate saved for posterity? A local doctor wrote in the paper, "We can cite with authority that once vaccinated with success, that vaccines would guarantee a man a lifetime against smallpox." Here lies a fundamental problem with the prevailing medical community at that time. Vaccinations were one and done and guaranteed lifelong immunity. That is not true. It wasn't understood that childhood vaccines' efficacy reduces as one ages. So when poor Harriet was reported sick in the newspaper on May 4, the Herald editors attributed it to being overworked for caring for her sick family. I am speculating, but perhaps Dr. Barone assumed that because she was vaccinated and had the paper to prove it, she could not have had the smallpox. It might have been the reason why the young doctor erroneously diagnosed the family with chickenpox. So let's talk about Henry Barone. He was born in the Netherlands, immigrated with his parents at age 17. He was the son of the pastor of the true Dutch Reformed Church, which is now the Christian Reformed Church. Barone understood the conservative and pietistic nature of the Dutch settlers. By the time of the epidemic in 1882, Barone had been practicing in Orange City for only a few years. Though steeped in the fatalistic and ignorant religious tradition, according to Beach and Kernan, Barone did extensively advertise and give smallpox vaccinations before the smallpox hit the town. So being a religious Hollander and a physician did not translate into being an anti-vaxxer. The types of vaccines used by Barone were newly introduced to the public in 1880. Dr. Barone likely bought his vaccines from a vaccine farm where cowpox was grown in calves. This was sent via rail. These vaccines needed to be refrigerated to maintain their efficacy. Dr. Barone would take a lancet, open up your skin, and place the vaccine inside the wound. If the vaccine worked, a skin lesion filled with pus and would form over and crust. These early vaccines consisted of a live virus, and vaccine recipients often developed a mild case of variola. It is quite possible that the other Dutch doctor, J.A.F. de L'Espinasse, resorted to an even riskier practice of arm-to-arm vaccinations. His sister Frederica wrote that the smallpox vaccine was still conveyed from one person to another person with dire results. In this type of vaccination, pus was scraped from a vaccinated arm to use on another patient. So for at least 2 months before the smallpox deaths were reported in the newspaper, the community was preparing for the advancement of smallpox by getting vaccinated. In fact, on April 6th, the Herald claimed that many of our town folks are seriously indisposed from the effect of vaccination. Those who suffered side effects were mentioned in the newspaper. Harry Lewis suffered a lot from this poisonous virus. And poor Miss Henrietta Van de Steg was confined to bed and took cold to the sore when her scab fell off. And the sheriff, Thomas Dunham, got vaccinated but ended up with variola all over his body, and he swore he would never be vaccinated again. Additionally, and most importantly, by August, vaccines became mandated. The Board of Health required every one of our citizens who have not been vaccinated to have the operation performed at once or be subject to a fine. Dr. de l'Espinasse set up 3 clinics per week where people could receive the vaccine for free. In that same letter, Alexander Beach also attacked the efforts of the Board of Supervisors to contain the disease, claiming there were loose quarantine regulations, slack guards, no hospital, contaminated clothing hung outside. There was absolutely no disinfection of the buildings. We have already proved some of those attacks as inaccurate. Barns, the Orange House, and basement acted as quarantine facilities. In addition to the newspaper notice about the disinfection of the Orange House, the businesses owned by the Haverkamps were also disinfected. In reading the newspapers and other primary documents, once smallpox was definitively in the community, the board introduced several rules designed to stop the spread of disease. Checkpoints on roads directly outside of town stopped all traffic from leaving and entering the city. If a house had an infected patient, a red flag was posted outside the home. The board hired guards to prevent anyone from leaving or entering an infected home. Eventually, the Board of Health threatened a $25 fine if people didn't comply with the quarantine laws. Additionally, people were not allowed to congregate in large groups during the epidemic. The public school closed, and the Reformed Church temporarily discontinued church services. A refutation of Beach's letter was anonymously written by a Hollander. This Hollander hotly writes, "Has not every house been quarantined? Have we not had for every house a watchman besides a watchman over the watchman? Have we not spent hundreds, nay thousands of dollars to pay expenses that were only to check the disease? What in the world shall we do more? Kill the first wretch that gets the smallpox?" The smallpox epidemic in Sioux County also fueled the gossip mills, causing people not just to suffer from disease, but from personal attacks. All 3 families that I featured tonight, the Haverkamps, the Hollenbecks, the Bettons, were on the receiving end of malicious rumors. Garrett Haverkamp was threatened by a lawsuit for breaking the quarantine to help the Youngward family prepare a corpse for burial. The accusations were so malicious that the Herald's editor proclaimed that the originators of this story should be made to pay all that the law will allow. A malevolent person spread 2 terrible stories about Matilda Hollenbeck. One rumor said she went insane after contracting the smallpox and disappeared into the prairie for 3 weeks. She was also accused of negligence, of not allowing anyone near her brother while he would lay sick for 14 days. The editor of the Herald refuted these stories. The rumor was so widespread that her husband had to write a letter to her hometown newspaper of Green Lake, Minnesota, to clarify these rumors. Finally, Anthony Benton, as the treasurer of Sioux County, was attacked by the Americans, especially by our fire eater Kernan. For improper bookkeeping of the county finances, Benton was called a scoundrel and a defaulter. And later, Judge William Hutchinson in 1919 hotly disputed all of those allegations. The last of the smallpox victims, Simon Kuiper, a beloved teacher, died the first day of September. Smallpox ended, either by people contracting the disease or through vaccination. there were no human hosts left for the virus to survive. The 1882 Orange City smallpox outbreak came at a cost. The illness claimed many lives, left some blind, left others permanently disfigured with scars. Businesses suffered economic losses from shutdowns, and quarantines kept visitors away from town. Now, why did this disease spread so virulently in this community? It is possible that smallpox vaccines were too late and that the disease was already silently spreading before people realized it was here. It is possible that people thought they were already immune because they were vaccinated as children in the Netherlands. It is possible that vaccine points by railroad acquired by Dr. Baron were not viable. It is possible that people were getting sick from arm-to-arm vaccinations. And it is possible that some in the community were anti-vaxxers as accused by Alexander Beach. But it is also possible that sometimes disease wins despite humankind's best efforts. So, what happened to our cast of characters? The anti-Hollander Americans didn't stick around. Silas Tolman sold the Alton Review after 3 years and moved to Sioux City. 15 later, he was spotted back in Alton, this time as a bass drummer for the Salvation Army. The new Alton editor reported that Brother Tolman let loose a prayer that was heard a block away, calling sinners to repent. Tolman, instead of drumming up subscribers, was now drumming up souls. William Hubbard Kernan continued to move around the Midwest, causing all sorts of trouble with his mighty and ferocious pen. When he left Sioux County, the Herald gave him this farewell: "Notorious Kernan has left this section of the county for a clime more congenial to his peculiar tastes and notions." The newspaper, The Index, moved back to Patterson, and the Herald editors declared that every citizen of our town will bless the minute it left. In 1908, Kernan died in a poorhouse in Memphis, Tennessee, from locomotor ataxia caused by tertiary syphilis. By 1883, Alexander Beach, unlike the thrifty Dutchman, had overextended his business and owed creditors. Soon, all the Beach family members moved away, and they were not destined to stay in the Alton records. Some Orange Cityans moved away too. Dr. Henry Baron left in 1883. Townspeople harbored resentment toward him for his role in the smallpox debacle. The Hollenbecks sold the Orange House in 1885, and mercifully, that building burned down the next year. Other Dutch persisted. The Bettons, Youngwards, and Haverkamps continued to live and contribute to our community. Sorry, 1882 anti-Hollanders, the Dutch did not go down. In the fall of 1882, the railroad depot opened to great fanfare, ensuring that Orange City would not become that ghost town. New Dutch immigrants and migrants continued to populate Orange City. Orange City nearly quadrupled its population from 320 in 1880 to 1,246 in 1990. And by 1888, Hospers became an Iowa representative and then an Iowa senator, expanding his influence into the greater Iowa. Even today, Hosper's achievements are recognized by the State Historical Society of Iowa, and it is Henry, not Alexander Beach, who is featured in an exhibit at the museum, and his face now adorns the history bus. But in conclusion, I'm going to end my story with a satisfying arc. In 1904, a permanent courthouse opened in Orange City, solidifying Orange City as the epicenter of the county. But here is the redeeming twist. Nearly 20 years after Alexander Beach moved away from Alton, his eldest son, Wilfred Beach, who the town Alton could have been named for, was hired as the architect of our beautiful courthouse. Thank you. I have a few minutes. If you want to ask a couple questions, I'll do my best. But otherwise, do we have anybody to wrap up? Otherwise, I'm going to invite you to our next night at the museum, which is August, oh dear, August 12. Are you going to wrap this up? Great. I was winging that.
Well, didn't she do a great job? Thanks, Sarah. Well, I'll just repeat what Sarah said. We'd like to invite you to our next Nights at the Museum, which will be August 12th at 6:30. Abby Sitzman, a museum board member, will present the Ku Klux Klan in Northwest Iowa, the menace of the 20s Klan. Now, this is a topic that I really haven't heard explained much or at all, and look forward to hearing Abby's take on the phenomenon and how it occurred, and also what contributed to the emergence in Northwest Iowa. I'd also like to thank you all for your support, for your monetary support, as well as your volunteering in our museum as well as other places. And also I'd like to let you know that we do still have some merchandise in the back room, and it's going like hotcakes, so you might want to pick some up. So that being said, we look forward to seeing you next week, or next month, sorry.